Very good evening, Shehan. We are most fortunate to have Shehan, also very rooted Sri Lankan from history, who has been in Australia for long years. I was trying to count those years.
That's correct, 1985.
1985. And Shehan has been the international manager for CQU for the last 12 years. So welcome, Shehan.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Just like to start with talking about CQ per se. Before that, let me ask the question about Australia.
Yes.
So as you know, there's so much of conversation about whether Australia is the market to be as for students of the future.
Yes.
Whether it's a place that I can settle in, where I can basically trust my career in and also my life in. Now that's been a no-brainer question for long years.
Sure.
But since of late, you had this kind of change that's happening right now. We've seen the government has been concerned about migration into Australia, and we have also seen in the last intakes, we've seen a lot of visas that got delayed.
Yes.
There's been conversations about housing. There's also the challenge of whether people could invest into housing and we have a sustainable life in Australia.
Yes.
So what would you like to share with us, Shehan, about Australia per se? Why should a student basically come into Australia? And of course, we'll come back to your university later.
Sure. No, great question. Thank you. So I think one of the great things about Australia is I can say very confidently, it doesn't matter where a student chooses to study, be it Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, a regional town like Rockhampton, students will have a fantastic experience. And I think that is one thing that we are very confident about when a student chooses to study in Australia, is that their learning experience and their living experience will be of a high standard.
Okay.
And so I think that's one of the reasons students should consider Australia, is that I think as a destination, it is a fantastic place to study. I think the other thing also for Australia is that the Australian government has made studying in Australia a little bit more viable for students, with the opportunity to work whilst they study in part-time work. As you know, students can work for 48 hours a fortnight, and that helps students, I think, with being able to study, live and work in Australia. The other thing I think which Australia really provides an opportunity for is that it's providing a destination for students that's not just limited to the period of time that they study in Australia. As you would know, students have the opportunity for post-study work rights, or what's also known as a temporary graduate visa. And that allows a student, after they have studied, to be able to remain in Australia for a period of time to work, and I think to put what they have learned into practice in an Australian setting. So all of those benefits, I think, which we have in Australia, a fantastic lifestyle, great weather, you know, I can go on about some of those key selling points, but I think mainly wherever a student chooses to study, they have a fantastic learning experience and a fantastic living experience. I think the opportunity to work whilst they study makes studying in Australia a little bit more accessible. And finally, I think those opportunities to get that post-study experience in Australia is fantastic. And I think one of the things that we've always championed is this opportunity for a fantastic return on investment. So a student who studies in Australia, they get a world-class education, but they also get an opportunity to work in Australia for the period of their temporary graduate visa.
So how many Sri Lankan families are in Australia at the moment? Any sense
Gosh,
of that?
well, all I know is that when the Sri Lankan cricket team plays at the MCG, they say it's like a home game. So there are a lot of Sri Lankans in Australia. I think the largest expatriate community are in Melbourne, in Victoria, but I myself am a Sri Lankan, and I've never been too far away from a fellow Sri Lankan in where I live now in Sydney.
I'm sure the numbers I hear about, it's about 100,000, about 80 to 100,000. I'm not sure about the exact census.
I'm not 100% sure on
and there's a number of generations, you know, people who came in some time back.
Yes, and I think, you know, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, there were a lot of families who migrated to Australia, and since then, I think, there have been multiple generations in Australia. Speaking from my personal experience, I have cousins who were born in Australia, whilst I was born in Sri Lanka, and then my family migrated to Australia. There are many generations who have been born in Australia.
So, Shehan, you're saying Australia is yet the number one destination for international students. That's what you're telling our audience?
Yes, I think especially for Sri Lankan students,
okay.
Australia has traditionally been the number one study destination, and I think for good reason. But
so nothing has changed as from the conversations that we hear.
Yeah, I think Australia, there has been government policy which has been spoken about in regards to being able to manage the number of international students in the country. But I think at an institutional level, I think Australia remains a very welcoming country to international students at the institutional level. I think the way that we as a university view international students is that they're a priority of ours in the same way as our domestic students are.
Thank you. Shifting to the subject at hand.
Yes.
About CQ.
Sure.
So I think our students, our audience would like to know why CQ over any other university that you would compare with.
Sure.
And why should they come to CQ? Yeah. What makes you different?
Yeah, great question. And I think for me, if there was one thing that I would choose, is our graduate outcomes. I think we are very focused on giving students, improving students' opportunity post-graduation. That's the role that we see ourselves playing. We want to provide students with access to quality education, but we also feel a great responsibility to make sure that a student who studies at CQU has the ability to fulfill the dreams that they had. And in most instances, the dreams that an international student has is for them to be able to pursue the career of their dreams. So at CQU, we do this in a few ways. And I think the first is we create accessible access to education. And that starts with, I think, our fee structure. We offer some of the most affordable fees at an Australian government university, and we have a suite of scholarships that students can apply for as well. We understand that one of the hurdles for students to access education is often the fees that are charged to go to a university. So we do everything we can in our power to try to keep those as low as possible so that students have the best opportunity to access Australian education. At CQUniversity, we also really prioritize the ability for students to get practical work experience whilst they study with us. We know that there are thousands of students each year that graduate with a Bachelor of Business. How are we going to differentiate our students when they are looking at opportunities post-graduation? And what we do at CQUniversity for the majority of our programs that international students choose is we have an internship that these students can do as part of their degree. The internship is 10 weeks in duration. We as a university find the internship for the student. The internship is part of the course, so it doesn't extend the duration of the course. And most importantly, it also doesn't increase the cost of the course. And what we see with that is that it gives students the ability to get practical experience in an Australian context, which sets up these students really well for opportunities post-graduation. And where do we see that bearing fruit? And that is very much in our graduate employment rates and our graduate starting salaries. Our graduate employment rates and our starting salaries, according to QS and also to the QUILT data, is some of the highest in the country. So we have some of the most affordable fees, but we have some of the highest graduate starting salaries
So what's the secret there?
Yeah, I think the secret behind that is, I think, the internship program and the fact that we see our role as a university in not only educating students, but being that conduit between graduation and employment. So we have career officers on campus that not only focus on finding students part-time work whilst they study with us, but also helping them find full-time work when they graduate with us. I think the internship, though, really exposes these students and gives them real experience that they can put on their CV. And as you and I know, having relevant experience in the country that you're trying to find work in is a really high priority, and the internship gives these students 10 weeks of opportunity. And I think the final one is, there are a lot of universities that offer internships, but I think the fact that we find the internship for the student, it doesn't extend the duration, it doesn't extend the cost, I think just makes the internship far more accessible for CQUniversity students.
So you're saying it gives you a good 360-degree exposure for life in terms
Yes.
of picking up learning from practice. That's what your exposure helps you with?
Yes.